Welcome to Self-Preservation Strategies. My name is Maureen Pollard, and I'm a social worker with about 30 years experience in the field. When I began in my work as a young social worker, I expected that if I listened closely and paid attention to details, that I would become a super caregiver. Now, nobody issued me a cape then, and I don't have one now, and I've learned quite a few things over the years about how to be a good caregiver. But I've also discovered that I would hear stories that make me sad, stories that make me afraid, stories that make me angry, and stories that leave me shaking my head in confusion. And maybe it looks a little like this, except I'm rounder in the afterwork picture. We're all different. When we think about compassion fatigue, what we're really thinking about is feeling so drained that we don't have the energy to engage with people in caring ways. We just don't have it in us. So factors that contribute to compassion fatigue include burnout, where we're overwhelmed by the accumulated levels of stress. We maybe have low job satisfaction and we're having trouble keeping up with the workload. We can also experience moral injury, and that happens when we have to do something that goes against our personal values, but we have to do it because it's part of the job, maybe because of policies and procedures or laws or other rules that we have to follow. And we also, when we work in a high stress, trauma exposed environment, are at risk of experiencing direct trauma ourselves, experiencing secondary traumatic stress when we are a witness to someone else's experience of trauma, or becoming exposed to vicarious trauma when we are repeatedly exposed to traumatic material that each incident in itself may not traumatize us, but the buildup over time of repeatedly witnessing and experiencing those traumas change our worldview. We start to be less trusting, more anxious, struggling to see safety and find positives because we see so much difficult every day. So let's think about how the brain works when we're well. Typically, we have rational thinking and logic that happens in the front part of our brain. And in the center part of our brain, we deal with our emotion regulation. And when things are going well, our survival center in the brainstem takes care of things like respiration, circulation, and digestion. When trauma hits, it activates the amygdala, and the amygdala sends a cascade of chemicals, including adrenaline and cortisol, throughout the body that enables us to respond to the crisis. And so we have this defense mechanism, this survival skill that means that we're ready for fight, flight, or sometimes freeze, depending on what our brain thinks that will help us the most in the situation. That's an automatic response to trauma that everyone has. When we work in public health and public safety, what we learn is training that helps us overcome that response, whatever our natural response is, so that we can take action and respond to the crisis in front of us. When we work in high stress, trauma exposed environments, Tanya Glenn says that there are two types of internal danger we face. We face the danger of psychic battering, which is really the wear and tear of working in these environments over time and witnessing so much tragedy. It really takes a toll on us. But we can also get stuck in a moment. We can get focused on what went wrong in an incident and start blaming ourselves, doubting ourselves, and going over a lot of what ifs, shoulda, coulda, woulda, all of those kind of ideas. And either of those are dangerous to our well-being. Françoise Mathieu also talked about some dangers to our well-being, and she talked about compassion fatigue at work, including horizontal violence. When we think about horizontal violence, this is a term that comes from research in the field of nursing, and it is related to the way that experienced and seasoned staff helps support or train new staff coming on. Traditionally, nurses are known, for example, I've heard the phrase that they're known to eat their young. And what that to me has come to mean is the fact that more experienced and seasoned nurses didn't receive a lot of support in their training. They were left to fend for themselves and learn how to do it to sink or swim on their own accord. And so when new nurses come onto the unit and into the workplace, those more seasoned nurses who didn't get support and help stand back with their arms crossed and watch to wait and see, how are you going to do it? What are you going to do? I had to learn on my own. Let's see how you handle it. And that sense of, every person for themselves, letting new people sink or swim without support, that's horizontal violence. It means that people aren't getting mentored, they're not getting supported, they're not feeling understood or safe at work. The second thing that can happen, according to Francoise Mathieu, is this idea of the must be nice phenomenon. And so when we think about that, think about the times that you may have said or thought to yourself as you watch one of your coworkers in action, must be nice to have time to take a vacation, or must be nice to have time for lunch, or even must be nice to have time to go to the bathroom. And I want to suggest to you that if you are looking at someone around you who's taking care of their needs and you're thinking to yourself, must be nice, that's probably a sign that you need some of that too. And so I would encourage you to think about taking that vacation, stopping to eat some lunch, and pausing to go to the bathroom when that happens too. Right? We can notice when we're feeling that little bit of envy of someone else, and we can take care of ourselves as a result. When we think about our experience when we're well, you may have heard of this term window of tolerance. And when we're feeling well, that's where we are. We're in our window of tolerance and our brain is working well. We're able to manage our feelings and think rationally all at the same time. When a crisis hits, sometimes it bumps us up into a state of hyperarousal where we become vigilant and reactive. Other times, it will bump us down into a shutdown or flat, numb mode where we disconnect and withdraw. Now, sometimes we have a tendency to go one way or another, regardless of the crisis, and others of us respond to different crises with one or the other of these reactions. When we get bumped into these hyper or hypoarousal states, though, our goal is always to get back to that window of tolerance so that we can function well again. Tara Hale wrote in August 2020 about the fact that our surge capacities are depleted. And so our surge capacity is exactly that ability to respond to a crisis, handle it when it happens, and then come back to normal, right? The problem is that when we work in situations where there's chronic, ever-changing, indefinite, and unpredictable situations, then we are going to be depleted in our capacity. And this is true in high stress, trauma exposed environments at the best of times. And it's extra true during a pandemic, which is really what Tara Hale was writing about. So we think about this idea that part of what affects our capacity is that we're experiencing tangible losses. Our relationships are changing as people move and sometimes die. Our employment status might be changing. Our physical and mental health is being impacted by what's going on around us, and we may experience losses in that way as well. And then we have ambiguous losses. We lose a way of life, we lose a sense of security and freedom, an ability to be trusting. We can have to change all of our routines, which is disruptive and difficult. And we have a loss of rituals as well. In particular, in the pandemic, we've lost rituals around the way to be with people at the end of life and after death. In all of the restrictions that have been intended to reduce the spread of COVID-19, we have lost a lot of ways that we gather and support one another and come together as humans that were ways that traditionally have helped us, get back into that window of tolerance, right? So I ask you to pause for a moment and think, how are you doing? Is stress really affecting you? Are you starting to unravel a little like the zebra? It wouldn't be a surprise with all that you have been facing and have been under in the last, several years, right? So I invite you to consider taking a personal inventory and just pay attention to yourself. Think about how it feels when you're good to go, when you have enough energy and you feel good about your work or the tasks in front of you, whatever they are. And then think about and notice what happens when you have warning signs. Because noticing and knowing our warning signs is such an important part of wellness, right? I know that my warning signs include my shoulders going up around my ears, my face getting frowny, and me saying a lot of bad words. I mean, I say bad words on a fairly regular basis. Um, and when I'm in my warning zone, sometimes that's all I can say is bad words. So noticing that, do you get headaches? Do you get gut aches? What kinds of behaviors do you show when you're in your warning zone? When we are noticing that, when we're self aware, we can avoid falling into that state of impaired functioning, and we can do things to take care of ourselves to get back into our green zone. So, when we think about impaired functioning, what we're talking about is not sometimes as drastic as we would think of with the word impaired functioning. It could be as simple as skipping team meetings or taking shortcuts in note taking, something like that that can actually be impaired functioning because it's not the way that we want to do our best job. So, resilience was defined in 2015 by the American Psychological Association as the ability to adapt in the face of adversity, trauma, and stress. I like this definition because of the word adapt. I think it's so important to remember that as humans and as professionals working in a high stress, trauma exposed environment, that we can't avoid adversity, trauma, and stress. We can only adapt and adjust and take care of ourselves when it happens. So I want to talk about resilience today, but I also want to remember that as we talk about what you can do to take care of yourself, it's not making you responsible for systems issues. We can acknowledge the fact that we're working in systems and structures that are deeply problematic. And while we work to change this reality, we can also recognize that we need self preservation strategies to help us weather the storms that we're going to live through. And so when I talk about personal resilience, I acknowledge that there is a greater organizational, community, national resilience that needs to be tended to by people in power. And I'm just here today to focus in on what can you do for yourself in the middle of the storm that life is raging upon us. So, what are some personal factors in resilience? Well, how we think about things really matters. The language that we use and the way that we turn our attention to the situations we find ourselves in. So, in this cartoon, the person has a stack of papers that are urgent and another stack that's more urgent. And this person says, I have a lot of excitement in my life. I used to call it tension, but I feel better now that I call it excitement. Right. And so just recognizing that change of wording can actually have an impact on how we feel about what we're doing. We see that how we think about things matters. We also want to think about how we cope with our feelings. If we think that feelings are like waves, we can't stop them from coming, but we can learn to surf. And so feelings are meant to happen, to be felt, and to flow through us. And if we think about handling our feelings, kind of like we think about handling a wave on the side of the ocean or a Great Lake, if you stand still and try not to let it move you, that wave is going to knock you down, or at least it's going to move you somewhere. If you take some control of the situation and dive into the wave, you're spending a fair bit of energy, but you have a little bit of say in how this wave hits you when you do that. And then the third way to cope with a wave is to, of course, surf on it, to let the wave carry you, to feel it in around you, and then to let it recede and let the next wave come in. And so we have some choices about how we handle our feelings, and we can think about that analogy of the waves and decide, do we want to try and stand still in the face of what we're feeling? Do we want to try and dive into it and face it? Or do we want to just try and surf it and let it come and then recede? As we're thinking about resilience, we're also thinking about goals, things that are important to us, and we can see that it's important to have SMART goals. In this cartoon, we know that Ms. Mallard isn't supportive of Mr. Mallard's dream of moving to the desert because moving to the desert is not a very smart goal for a duck, right? So when we think about SMART goals, we want to think about specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. For example, If I want to eat healthier, I'm not going to probably set a goal of never eating chocolate again. It's not very realistic for me. I enjoy chocolate and I want it to be part of my life. So, what I might do instead is set a smart goal of taking a serving of vegetables and adding it to my lunch, and adding a serving of vegetables to dinner, and trying to do that at least 5 days a week. And then in time, perhaps if I'm more satisfied with my meals, then I'm going to be less craving sweets after them, right? So we can think of the kind of SMART goals that break down what we're trying to achieve into small steps that are actually, more possible for us and build success. When we're thinking about resilience, we also want to think about the idea of accepting change. Change is going to happen. Whether we like it or not, it's coming. And so I invite you to think about the idea of whether or not you are a change avoider or a change seeker. Now, there's nothing wrong with being on either end of the spectrum or falling someplace in the middle, but being on either end of the spectrum brings some challenges. For example, my dad was a change avoider and he did not enjoy change at all. He came to visit me in Coburg one time and he and my mom went for a drive and they visited Kingston. And when they got home, my dad was grumpy and I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "Kingston's changed." And I said, "Well, when was the last time you were there?" And he said, 20 years ago. And I said, "Well, okay," because I thought, you would expect a city to change in 20 years or so, right? So don't be like my dad. Expect change, prepare yourself for it, mourn if you have to, right? But know that change is coming and you can think about it differently. When people are like me, I'm a change seeker. I have a 4-page resume. Even though I've worked not at a ton of different places, I've held a lot of different jobs within the places that I've worked. And I enjoy a new challenge. I like learning and trying new things. And so that works for me. But sometimes as a change seeker, it's also important for me to stop and check in. Am I seeking this change because I'm trying to avoid something? Am I running away from something that I should actually stand still and face instead? And so if you are a change seeker like me, really give that some thought and reflection, um, so that you can be prepared and sometimes move with the changes, and sometimes stay still and reflect and grow in a way that might be new. Thinking about optimism and perspective. Of course, when we think about optimism, we think about the person thinking the glass is half full. And when we think about optimism, I like to consider the concept of realistic optimism, which means that we have perspective and we can see that actually, technically, the glass is always full. It's half full with water and half full with air. And so we can think about where are we standing in respect to the details of a situation? Are we so close that we can only see some small details, or are we taking a step back to look at the big picture, using our perspective to have realistic optimism about what's possible and what's possibly good in a situation? We also want to think with resilience about a sense of control. And this quote says, "We can't direct the wind, but we can adjust our sails." And so the example that I often use when I talk about having a sense of control is the idea that we definitely can't set our scheduled time of work very often, right? We're often told this is when your shift starts. And so you don't control that part, but you do control how early you get up and how you spend your time getting ready for work. So if you're a morning person, you may get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, take time for a workout, have a shower, eat some breakfast, put something in the crock pot for dinner that night, and then leave the house in time to be at your shift for 7 o'clock. If you are not a morning person, you may have done a lot of those tasks the night before. And so you get up at 6:30 and you quickly get dressed and you grab a piece of toast on your way out the door and roll into work at 7 o'clock. And it's not so important, again, whether you're an early riser or a night owl. What's important is that you plan for it and take control of what you can take control of in a situation when your work hour is set for you, right? Resilience also is helped by having a sense of humor. And I love this slide because it's so true that when we work with humans in difficult and tragic situations, we often develop a morbid sense of humor. And that morbid sense of humor can be something that we feel maybe a little guilty about, or that we just accept as part of our way of coping with horrific situations. Um, Either way, if you do develop this morbid sense of humor, know that it's normal when we face horrific situations day in and day out. And just remember that it's good to keep in mind who's your audience, right? Because while this is something that your coworkers might understand and appreciate, it might not be something that the people in the Tim Hortons lineup will understand or appreciate. Similarly, I think that we can remember that humor helps us through hard times. You know, there was a time in August 2019 in my family where my husband was having challenges at work that were pretty significant for his company. And at the same time, his dad's dementia had declined, and we were looking at moving him out of our home and into a care place. And in the process of that, um, we were struggling. That was a hard time for us. And so during that time, we often would watch some comedy, some funny movie or some sitcom, and um, and that really helped us because for an hour to an hour and a half, we would have a little escape from reality and some silliness that would let us just relieve our tension for a little while. So having a sense of humor can really help us through difficult situations. We also want to think about the idea of healthy boundaries. Being able to say no to other people and have a healthy boundary means that you're also able to say yes to yourself. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're trying not to let yourself get so depleted that you can't be engaged in caring interactions with others. There was a time several years ago where I was starting to feel really depleted. I wasn't feeling well physically or mentally or emotionally. And what I came to realize as I looked around at what was happening is that it had been almost 5 years since I'd taken a day off to just do something for myself. I was saying yes to people at work. I was working 3 different jobs. I was saying yes to people in my family and my friends, but I wasn't really saying yes to myself because there wasn't any time for it. And as I started to realize that, I started to make some changes in my life and draw some boundaries. I gave up some of the work that I was doing that meant that I had to work evenings and weekends to do it. And then I was able to do more day work um, and set a little bit different boundary. And then I did some different things with my family. My kids started to get older, and I had a little bit more opportunity to set some boundaries in that regard as well. So saying yes to yourself means that sometimes you have to say no to other people. And that's not about not caring about them, it's about having to preserve yourself. We need time for rest and recovery. If we don't take time for rest and recovery, then we can't restore ourselves. We can't get our energy back. And we know that we can't pour from an empty cup, right? So, thinking about rest, Amanda Rocheleau in 2020 talked about 2 kinds of rest. Passive rest, she described as two-handed tea. So, that's a situation where I talk about the idea of making yourself a hot beverage that you enjoy. And so often when we do that, we take a couple of sips and then we get distracted and we come back and it's cold and we microwave it and we take another couple of sips and so on. And so I invite you to consider taking some rest by sitting with both hands on your mug for the duration of time that it takes you to drink your beverage, and just taking that time as a few minutes of rest. And we can't do that all the time, but see if you can't sometimes begin to take that moment for yourself. Feel the warmth on your hands, inhale the scent of your beverage, and feel the warmth as it goes into your body. We also want to talk about the idea of active rest, which is another important balance in our schedules and our well-being. And Amanda Rocheleau talks about that as cruise control. And so that's when we sort of, watch movies or TV shows, or when we play video games or do jigsaw puzzles. What we're doing is actually something that's actively engaging us, mind and body. And so it distracts us from whatever our worries or usual tasks and responsibilities are. But it also is giving us a rest because it's completely different. from what we usually have to pay attention to. And so these are two kinds of rests that you can look for ways to include in your life. Social support and connection is another important part of resilience. And I always encourage people to try and feel connected to some people at work. That's important. It's at work that we often in this high stressed, trauma exposed work, it's at work that we often find people who understand what we do and what we know about the world because of the work that we do. Right. But it's also important to have some balance and to have some friends outside of work, who keep you in having some perspective about healthy families or situations that aren't always crisis and trauma related, so that you can remember that there's more to life than this window of intensity that you have in your workplace, right? When I was a young child welfare worker, one of the things that I did to help me maintain my balance and stay connected in my community outside of work was coach soccer as a volunteer. So I coached 9 to 11-year-olds until I had my own kids. And then I coached my kids at various ages as they grew as well. And so that connection in that way to my community helped me have some perspective and balance and experience of healthy families outside of my work in child welfare, which was good for my balance. Gratitude is another important part of resilience. And I like this quote that says, "The gratitude teaches us to appreciate the rainbow and the storm." Even when we go through difficult circumstances, we can find something to be grateful for amidst even deep pain and turmoil. Um, you know, maybe we can't find it in the moment that we're feeling deep pain, but deep pain is a feeling, and we know that those waves of pain recede and come back and recede. And so we can look for those moments in between the waves and see where we can find some gratitude in our life. There are two different types of challenges I invite people to consider when it comes to gratitude. One practice is to think about 3 good things a day. And so at the end of every night, I invite you to consider thinking about 3 things that made you happy or made you smile, made you feel good, that you're grateful for, that happened each day. And you might choose to write these things in a journal. If so, I kind of recommend keeping a separate journal for gratitude from any other journaling you do, because what you'll find in a gratitude journal is that if you keep it to gratitudes, it becomes a reference tool. When you're having a difficult time later, you can flip through and see all the good things that you've made a record of in this journal. It's not necessary to write it down, though, to benefit from this gratitude practice. If you spend time at night or before you're ready for bed, reflecting on something good about each day, even just thinking about it is in, an important aspect of retraining your brain. Our brains, because of the alarm response that we experience, get really good at noticing negatives, detecting danger, and responding to it. And then our ability to notice good things declines. And so if we practice every night remembering some good things, we actually get better at it and we have more balance. It can help reduce our anxiety and our depression and our low moods. Another way to practice gratitude is to write thank you cards. And so I like to share the story that in 2021, I was, struggling a little bit as we moved into the second year of the pandemic. And I decided I needed to do some gratitude practice to help me remember the good things. And so I decided I would write a thank you card a week. That would be my target for 2021. Now, some weeks I wrote 1 card, some weeks I wrote 4 cards, some weeks I wrote no cards. But over the course of 2021, I did write 52 thank you cards. And it was lovely because thank you cards warmed me 3 ways, just like wood does. Wood warms you when you chop it, it warms you when you split it and stack it, and then it warms you when you put it in the wood stove or the fireplace as well. And thank you cards were like that for me because it warmed me to think back over the things that I had to be grateful and thankful for and to write those notes. It warmed me to put them in the mail to people. And most often I did send them by mail rather than email because it's kind of nice to get a little bit of mail that isn't a bill. And so that was part of my pleasure, was sending people some nice little mail. And then the third way that it warmed me was that often people would respond, um, letting me know that my thank you card had lifted them up at a time when they needed it, letting me know that they appreciated me too. And so these are some ways that you can consider bringing some gratitude into your life. And maybe you don't need to do 52 thank you cards. Um, I'm a pretty high energy person. And so that was easy for me. But maybe even just doing a couple of thank you cards is a good way to begin and to get a little bit of that benefit for yourself. When we think about resilience, we think about self care. But in 2022, I've begun calling it self preservation instead of self care, because self care sounds luxurious. It sounds like it's optional. And self preservation sounds more like what we're trying to do, which is to save ourselves from very difficult circumstances, from losing ourselves in the midst of them. Right. And so we need to take care of our physical, emotional, social, and spiritual self. And so I'm going to give you some ideas. You can see on this slide that there are a number of different things you could try. And we've been talking about that as we talk about personal resilience factors as well. And the example that I like to mention is meditation. I don't like to sit still, and I never thought that I would be a meditator. But I was challenged to try the 30 Days of Calm on the Calm app, CALM. And so I tried it thinking, oh, this is never going to work for me. And in the beginning, it was hard. I could only sit for a minute or two, and then I would be done for the day. But when I had finished the 30-day challenge, I had found some guided meditations that I enjoyed with a person's voice that I found calming. I had found some music on the app that I liked. And so by the end of the 30 days, I could sit for 15 to 20 minutes, which is quite an improvement from 1 to 2 minutes. Now, I didn't continue meditating every single day, but I do meditate from time to time when I need it. When I'm looking for a way to clear my mind, I can turn those meditations on or that music back on. And I formed a pathway in my brain that really helps me calm down quickly. Right. And that was a really good example to me of trying something outside of my comfort zone that I didn't think would work, and actually discovering a tool that was very helpful. So I encourage you to think about, what are some of the ways that you can bring a little bit of something in that you maybe aren't sure will work, but test it out, experiment with it a bit, give it a little bit of time. 30 days is a nice um, length of time, because it's the time that they say it takes to form a new habit. I also like to say about meditation, though, that it does not need to be done sitting still with incense burning and chanting or any of that. You can also do mindfulness meditation by walking barefoot in a park or on a hiking trail where it feels safe to you to do so. There's a labyrinth at a retreat center that I go to, and I like to take my shoes off and walk barefoot in the labyrinth because it's a peaceful place. And my attention then is on where I place my foot as I walk in that labyrinth. And I find that to be a very calming exercise as well. So experiment, see what works for you. A lot of the times I give examples to encourage you to see that there are different ways to try things. But I recognize that there's far more opportunities and ways than just the ones that I'm sharing. So I want you to pause for a moment and think, what did you learn about self-care as you were growing up? And we learned about self-care, all of us did, by watching the people around us, how they took care of themselves and how they responded to us if we were resting or doing something to nurture ourselves. Did they hustle you back to work? Did they hustle back to work themselves? Right? What kinds of messages did you get about how it works to take care of yourself and how important that is? And as you listen to this discussion today, as you think about how you're doing in your life today, what do you believe about self-care now? Is it, like I said, is it luxurious and something you can do without, or is it necessary so that you can preserve yourself to continue giving excellent care to the people that you care about? Amanda Rocheleau says that self-care is a deliberate practice of knowing your needs and desires, taking responsibility for them, and living in a way that honors them. And I like to give the example that, after that time when I wasn't feeling so well and I realized I'd been working, for 5 years pretty much straight. Occasionally we took vacations with our kids, but any of you who have camped with young children know that a camping vacation is not really a mom's vacation, right? So that's still work, in my opinion. Um, Once I realized that, though, I started to go to, there's two retreat centers that I go to, and essentially I book a cabin in the woods for a couple of nights alone. I go into the cabin with the foods that I like to eat and some art supplies and my guitar, and I go to places where the internet's not great, so I'm not tempted to be on the internet the whole time, and where nature is close at hand, so I can walk by the river or in the woods. And by knowing that I need that time alone, even though I'm an extrovert, I really enjoy people and I'm energized by being with people, I still need that little bit of time alone. And in the beginning, I would go once a year. And last year, I went 3 times because that was what I needed to reset myself and come back to be able to continue to give care to my family and my community. So, how is it that we get into our green zone? Well, we get into our green zone when we deliberately acknowledge rewarding experiences. What are the things that are going well in your life? What do you love about your job? What do you love about your community? We're so good at noticing the negative and not so great at noticing the positive. So, how do we take the time to do that? Maybe we need to redefine success. We need to think about what's working and what's good for us. And maybe what we used to be able to do is not what we can do now. Um, you know, um, when I was at the start of the pandemic, I had done everything in person that I did. I teach in a college program. I do give individual and group therapy, and I deliver workshops and presentations and help support wellness programs. And in doing that, I was used to doing it all in person. And as I began to have to learn how to do things online, I had to redefine success and figure out what did that mean because I couldn't do things just the same way. Think about redefining success in your own circumstances because things have changed in how you're facing and what you're facing. Notice the things that you do that help you feel resilience. Notice your ability to adapt, right? Shinzen Young talks about suffering as pain times resistance. So, pain comes from dealing with something that is difficult. And suffering comes when we get locked into negative thoughts about whatever's happening. Compassion is the antidote. Compassion for ourselves and for others can help us relieve suffering, can help us move out of being locked in those negative thoughts. Compassion and kindness. When we think about self-compassion, author and researcher Kristen Neff talks about the fact that it has 3 key features. The first is having self-kindness. Giving yourself warmth and understanding when you're suffering is so important. Being able to connect yourself to a sense of common humanity and knowing that as humans, we are all experiencing suffering. We all make mistakes. We all experience loss and encounter frustrations. And then when we do that, we can also move into a place of mindfulness and just notice how are we feeling, paying attention to where you are in this moment and letting it be, feeling it, and letting it pass. Just like that analogy of the waves and letting them wash over us and recede and just noticing them. So, what can help us when difficulties are ongoing? Well, we can take a look at how can we accept that this is a difficult time instead of denying it or trying to hurry through it. How can we just accept that we're in the midst of a very hard time? How can we adjust expectations for ourselves and for others around us? Where can we give people a little bit of a break, including ourselves? How do we allow for a reduced capacity to function during this time? Now, there are some things that we can't allow for reduced capacity. We have to try to stay at our peak. And that means sometimes we have to decide Where can I give a little because I need to be able to perform in this other area of my life? Consider your perspective. It's true that this is a terrible time of loss and uncertainty, but it's also true that this could be a time of growth and opportunity. When I think about the fact that in February of 2020, I had no idea how to teach online, how to do therapy online, how to deliver virtual workshops, and help people support wellness programs in a virtual way. And all the things that I've learned means that my practice is expanded, and I have the opportunity, strength, skills, and knowledge now to do work in person and virtually that can help more people. Where are your opportunities for growth, even despite the difficulties? What are some fulfilling activities you can do even now? Can you take time for a cup of tea? Can you go for a walk or listen to a piece of music that you love? What are some ways you can stay connected to others and offer help even when you feel depleted? For me, that's those thank you notes. When I send someone a note card, it's helping me even when I feel down. It lifts me up, and I'm hopeful that it connects me to someone and it offers them a lift as well. So, thinking about how you handle things, try not to be like a sponge that absorbs everything and starts to feel heavy and weighted or can feel wrung out. But also try not to have a hard shell like a rock where everything just rolls off you and nothing matters, right? Try to be maybe more like the strainer or the sieve where you hold on to the good things and let the rest flow through. As you think about how to handle difficult situations, consider the idea of stop. Stop what you're doing. When something is difficult, take a moment, pause, take a few deep breaths. Observe what's happening in your mind and body. Where are you carrying tension? What are you thinking about? How can you adjust that so that you can proceed intentionally and with compassion for yourself and anyone else in the situation? Breathing is one of the ways that we can activate the calming center of our nervous system. So just like we have an alarm center in our nervous system, we have a calming center. It's activated by the vagus nerve, which runs from our brain to our gut and has wandering branches that go throughout our body. There are lots of different ways that we can activate that calming center of our nervous system, and breathing is an important one. So when we think about breathing, I want to invite you to just take a moment to get comfortable. Notice your breath. Are you breathing full, deep breaths that fill your lungs and raise your belly? Or are you breathing shallowly up in the upper parts of your lung? Whatever way you typically are breathing, your body is going to be responding to that. So we're going to practice some deep breathing. I invite you to think of some different mantras you can say as you breathe in and breathe out. As you inhale, you can say, breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I calm my mind. Or you can alternatively say, inhale, peace. Exhale, fear. Whatever kind of phrase works for you, it can help clear your mind, pause your racing thoughts to concentrate on those phrases, and take deep breaths and slow exhales. When I teach people intentional breathing, I often teach the 4-7-8 breathing strategy, and I'm going to invite you to do 3 breaths with me in this strategy right now. When we do this breathing strategy, I'm going to count while you inhale to 4, hold for a count of 7, and exhale to a count of 8. We're going to do 3 breaths, which takes less than a minute, and see how you feel. So getting comfortable. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Last one. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, if you don't like the feeling of holding for 7, you can skip that part and just inhale for 4. A nice deep inhale gives lots of oxygen for your brain and your muscles to relax with. And then exhale for 8. That long, slow exhale activates the vagus nerve and sends the calming chemicals through your body, including serotonin and dopamine. I encourage people to practice breathing in this pattern when they're feeling calm and rested. So maybe as part of your wake up routine, as part of your bedtime routine, and maybe sometime in the middle of the day, just pause for 3 deep breaths like this, because it only takes less than a minute to do this. And what you're doing is giving yourself a body memory, a muscle memory of taking those deep breaths so that when you are under strain, your body is more likely to remember how to do this. And it can activate the calming system, even as the alarm system's also being activated. And that can help you stay balanced. I also invite you just to experiment with putting your hand over your heart. This is a gesture that can feel really comforting sometimes. And so when you put your hand on your heart, I'm going to read a loving kindness meditation. And the first part of that loving kindness meditation is about self-compassion. And then the second part is compassion for others. And so as I read, try to experiment with your hands on your heart. May I learn to accept myself as I am. May I be safe. May I know peace. May I have the compassion that I need. Taking a deep breath. May we all accept ourselves as we are. May we all be safe. May we all know peace. May we all have the compassion that we need. And as we wrap up our session for today, I'd like to invite you to pause and continue resting as I read to you a meditation that I created as the pandemic has carried on and end most of my presentations with these days. Getting comfortable. You can look at this image, you can close your eyes, or you can look at it, whatever feels comfortable for you. Remember, you are one person doing the best you can in difficult circumstances. Like other times of great upheaval, this too will pass. Take a deep breath. Learn, rest, try again. That is all you can do, and it is enough. You will move through this in your own way and at your own pace. You are already adapting. Inhale calm. Allow a feeling of peace. Exhale stress. Let it all go. You have everything you need within you to feel and to heal, so you can continue to shine your light for yourself and for the world, one breath at a time. Thank you for listening today. I hope that something that I have shared in this presentation presents an opportunity for you to try something, maybe something new, or maybe something that you used to do that has fallen off your radar lately. Whatever that is, I wish you well, and I wish you peace. Thank you.